There is a shrub that grows wild across the American desert that tastes like salt. Pure salt. Lick a fresh leaf and your tongue knows it before your brain does. Dry that leaf, grind it down, and you get a powder that the Navajo, the Hopi, and the Pueblo peoples were sprinkling on food for centuries before a single blue cylinder of Morton ever sat on a kitchen counter. The plant is called four-wing saltbush, and almost nobody outside the Southwest has ever heard its name. That is not an accident. I want to be straight with you up front, because this is the part most channels get wrong. This plant is not a one-to-one swap for the salt in your shaker. It is not pure sodium chloride. What it is a seasoning. A salty, mineral, slightly green seasoning that adds a real salt note to soups, breads, roasted vegetables, popcorn, anything you would normally reach for the Morton can to fix. Use it like you would use a finishing salt or an herb blend. Start with half what you would normally use, taste, and adjust. That is the honest payoff, a flavor your kitchen does not currently have, growing for free in the American desert. Now let me show you why this is the case. Four-wing saltbush is what botanists call a halophyte. It is a salt plant. Its roots pull sodium straight out of the soil, and its leaves concentrate that sodium until the dried leaf weight can be 3 to 7% pure salt. The ash content of the dried plant runs 18 to 35%, and most of that is sodium and chlorine. That is why the leaf tastes the way it does. The plant is doing the salt mining for you. All you do is harvest, dry, and grind. And here is the cultural lock that I want you to sit with for a second. The Navajo were not curious about this plant. They built kitchens around it. They parched the seeds and ground them into flour. They used the leaves as a salt source for cooking. The Hopi burned the leaves and stems and used the alkaline ash to treat blue corn, the way you might use baking soda today. Saltbush, which they call chamiso, was not a survival food and it was not a novelty. It was a staple. The Southwest had a working salt plant in the ground long before any boat carried a barrel of mined salt up the Mississippi. So how did we forget it? This is where the story turns. In 1848, in Chicago, a small sales agency started selling mined salt to the American Midwest. By 1880, a man named Joy Morton bought into it. By 1910, it was called the Morton Salt Company, and by the time your grandmother was a kid, every kitchen in America had a blue cylinder on the shelf with the umbrella girl on the front and the slogan that became part of the language. When it rains, it pours. Morton today produces around 30 million tons of salt a year and runs about $1.5 billion in annual revenue in the United States alone. That blue cylinder did not just sell salt. It rewrote the definition of what salt is. Salt became a thing you buy, a white powder in a paper tube, iodized, refined, and shipped from a plant in Kansas or Louisiana. The salt plant that grew wild in the backyard of the Southwest got demoted to cattle browse. The kitchens that knew how to use it got priced out, schooled out, and quietly forgotten. This is the part where I want to say something direct. Nobody at Morton kicked Saltbush out of your kitchen. They did not have to. They just made salt so cheap and so convenient that the knowledge of every wild salt source in North America walked out the door on its own. And it walked out fast. Let me show you what the recipe actually looks like, because this is the part you can do this weekend if you have the right plant. You are looking at two options. Option 1 is four-wing saltbush itself, the native perennial shrub. It grows wild in USDA zones 4 through 10, all the way across the Great Basin, the Mojave, the Sonoran, and the Chihuahuan deserts, and out into the southern plains. If you live in the western half of the country, there is a real chance this plant is already in your county. A 1-gallon nursery plant put in the ground in spring will give you a leaf harvest the same year. It is a slow-growing perennial, but once it is in for decades. Option 2, and honestly, the option I would push if you live anywhere east of the Rockies, is garden orac. Atriplex hortensis. Same plant family, same salt concentrating trick, but it is an annual that you direct sow in the spring like spinach. It grows in zones 3 through 10, gets 3 to 6 feet tall, comes in green, red, or purple, and it lets the leaves go salty all summer long. It will self-seed for next year if you let one plant bolt. For most viewers, Foraging is the easier entry point. You can grow it in a raised bed, a pot on a patio, anywhere you can grow lettuce. Pay attention to this next part, because the process is the same for both plants. Harvest the young leaves and the soft tips in spring through summer. Rinse them in cold water to get the dust and the grit off. Spread them on a screen or a sheet tray, single layer, and dry them in a low oven at 175 degrees Fahrenheit until they are brittle. That usually takes 4 to 12 hours depending on humidity. You want to be able to crumble them in your fingers. Once they are bone dry, run them through a clean coffee grinder or pound them in a mortar until you have a fine, dark green powder. Store it in a small, airtight jar. It will keep for a year. Now the test. Sprinkle a pinch on hot roasted potatoes. Stir a teaspoon into a pot of bean soup. Mix it into bread dough before the second rise. Dust it onto buttered popcorn. You will taste salt first, and then something underneath the salt that no white shaker has ever given you. A little mineral, a little vegetal. A whole kitchen tradition that the Navajo and the Hopi and the Pueblo built into their food and that the American mainland forgot inside a single century. If you want to forage instead of grow, four-wing saltbush is the wild option. Across the western deserts, it is one of the most common shrubs you will see. Silver gray foliage, four-winged seed pods that look like little paper lanterns in fall. Take only young leaves. Leave the seed pods for the birds and for the plant to reseed itself, and do not strip a single bush. Eastern viewers, do not bother foraging for this. Grow Foraging in a backyard bed. Same result, no road trip. Here is what I want you to take away. The American kitchen used to be a much wider place. The Southwest had a salt plant in the soil. The Northeast had wild greens that nobody plants anymore. The Appalachian hollers had bitter teas and root medicines that walked off with the last generation that knew them. And we replaced almost all of it with a small set of products in plastic and paper sitting on a shelf in a store an hour from where we live. One of those products is salt in a blue cylinder. And one of the things that cylinder quietly replaced is a desert shrub that the first peoples of this continent used to season their food long before anyone drew a map of the country it grew in. You can put a piece of that back. You can grow garden Foraging in a pot this spring. You can buy a four-wing saltbush from a native plant nursery this fall and have leaf harvests by next summer. You can taste, in your own kitchen, the flavor of an American food tradition that almost no one alive today has put on their plate. If you want more videos that put forgotten plants back into your garden and your kitchen, hit subscribe. The next one is already growing.